Alright, so welcome to this video. What we're going to be working on today is doing some GM prep for the next session of Ruralpunk. And the main thing I have to work on is to start filling in some of the important contacts in town, because those will be the NPCs that the group primarily interacts with, but also will be sort of doing missions for and working with. And so they'll become important pretty fast. So what we're going to look at is I have the town character sheet here. And what I need to do is fill in some of the information about each of these contacts. So we can see that the first contact type is the gossip. And her name is Bailey Bales Madison. And so under it, there's space for two different traits, and when the team gets to know the contact, they'll find out what that trait is, and then they can basically get that contact's help for anything that involves that trait. So they can have the contact roll to help them out for things related to the trait. Once they know both the traits, then they get to use the contact's power. So, for example, for Bales, once they know both of her traits, they can use the Shift Blame action for free once per downtime. And so she helps them sort of manage the tension that's growing in the town as a free action during downtime. So what we're going to do is, to start with, I'm going to mostly rely on some of the traits that are in the default book to start filling in. So I have a blank town sheet over here that is just for the GM. So I can see for this one, I want the contact name to be Bales, and the power is Shifting Blame. And now I need to figure out two of Bale's traits. So I'm going to jump back over to the book. And the book has information about how to create contacts and different ways to start developing their personality and what they do. For now, what I'm going to focus on is just defining those two traits. So one of the first tips from the book is to think, if their town rule is true, what else do you know about the contact? So, for example, we know that Bales is the town gossip. So as we start looking at traits for her, what would be ones that fit? So, if I go down here, can see some of the example traits. And I think that our gossip is some ones that jump out. She could be an amateur sleuth, which makes sense. Or she could be welcome in all the wrong places, is kind of a different way of looking at it. That's how she gets her information. She could always know a guy, so always know someone that she's sort of connected to. I think that I want to go with welcome in all the wrong places. I think that a lot of times, like, the town gossip can be seen, like, stereotypically as this older woman who just, like, spies on people and knows a lot. But I think for Bales, she gets her information because she's welcome in all the wrong places. So that's the first trait. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up with one sort of superficial trait for all the contacts, and then we'll come back and look at what the deeper trait is. So our next person is the Daredevil, and his name is Boone in this town. So Boone, when they befriend him, if anyone gets hurt during a venture, they will earn extra favors from it. So sort of like getting hurt during the venture will impress the Daredevil, and they'll earn some extra favors. So if we think about our Daredevil, fearless is one that could always never say no to a dare. I think that one's a little too stereotypical. Knows too much, can never fit in, has lived everywhere. I actually think this would be interesting. Right hand to someone important. I think that the Daredevil is someone who it's easy not to take seriously because they're like chasing the adrenaline, but I think it'd be interesting if they're the right hand to someone important. So, continuing with these, we've got our champion is Jay. I am going to actually change that name to Rose. So, and it's going to be a she, her, and I will do that. And this is because the players met a person during their last adventure. It was this elderly woman named Rose, and she was just made up on the spot, but she kind of looks like, in my mind, the picture that I'd picked for the champion. So I'm just going to change that, and the players don't know that that's new. So what Rose can do as the champion is players can overcome limits to help a teammate. So normally a player will overcome their limits to just automatically succeed at a roll, and they gain a condition to do that. But if the champion is helping you, essentially you can take a condition to make one of your teammates auto-succeed at something. So Rose, we know Rose is a little elderly. We know that Rose is hanging out in weird smuggling places and connected to one of the factions in town that are kind of scavengers. So, let's see, who would our scavenging champion be? Alright, I think it's interesting if Rose is a former Metropolis executive, because I think little old lady is not typically what people think of. So former Metropolis executive. It's going to be the first thing they can learn about Rose if they get to know her. Our boss is London Price, and what he can do is basically make your teamwork more effective. So if they make a team group roll, in a normal roll, if you get more than 1 6, it's a critical. If you have the boss's power, then even when you do a group roll, so everyone's rolling together, multiple 6s from multiple people will count as a crit. So London Price is our boss, and let's see, to give kind of an idea of who he is, I think of a little bit as a boss in a rougher sense, maybe like a foreman who works in town, and so not like this super corporate type of boss. Like in the town, he's respected as an authority. And I think that our boss knows too much. And I imagine that would get a normal person in trouble, but because he's the boss and sort of seen as the authority in town, he survives knowing too much. But that's definitely going to be something that could come up in terms of sort of conflict or things to watch out for. So our caretaker, Ash, is who the group was working for last time. And so we've already learned some interesting things about Ash, specifically that they sent the team to go get medical supplies, but then it turned out to be parts of an AI and robot parts and not very much medical supplies. And that's really dangerous where the town is, because the wild likes to eat and feed on advanced technology. So in a lot of ways, Ash is endangering the town by bringing this in. So with that in mind, we're still going to look at kind of the typical ones. I mean, I think Fearless would make sense. I think that's kind of the downside of Fearless, is if you figure, like, I'm going to have this really dangerous plan and it doesn't matter what happens because they kind of don't care about that. Never leave anyone behind is very stereotypical caretaker. I think I'm going to go with Fearless. I think if we think about, like, motivations for why would Ash endanger the entire town, I like the idea that maybe they're a little bit fearless, like reckless. and it can be kind of that idea that they think they'll always succeed at what they do. And so they aren't as cautious as maybe they should be. So now we've got the freeloader, Chuck. And Chuck has a lot of history with the team. Let me take a look at that real quick to remember what Chuck's history is. So, we know that Scout has a positive relationship with Chuck. Chuck helped Scout out one time when he didn't need to, and pulled him out of danger from some flash floods. However, Jacob, our guide, played by Christian, has a negative relationship with Chuck because they were out drinking and got into a fight and said things they shouldn't, and they might have kissed. Jacob's not talking about that right now. So there's complicated relationships for that one. So, knowing that, I'm going to take a look at what some of the traits could be. Let's see. I think that Chuck serves a chimera because of the relationship with Jacob and Scout. I think that could be interesting. So, a chimera is a sort of a new life form. When the wild strain mutated life, it created a lot of mutant creatures that feed on advanced technology, but some of those creatures became very intelligent, as intelligent or maybe even more intelligent than humans. And the chimera, as they're called, are sort of the leaders of the wild now. They organize them, set goals, and sort of, in some ways, they are what keeps the society of the wild together. And so they're considered, in some ways, very scary, very threatening, but also very smart. And so our freeloader Chuck, he serves a chimera. And we actually have a chimera in one of the local town factions, so most likely he serves that one. And I think that's going to be interesting because Jacob, who he's had this fight with, is the wild soul of the group. And so, in some ways, Jacob is the one who would feel the most okay about Chuck serving a chimera. And then Scout, who's a mortal soul and likes Chuck, may not appreciate that his buddy is helping a creature that may or may not want to basically eat everyone in town. So our next person is Charity the Delinquent, and somebody has a positive relationship with her. Let me check that out real quick. Luna, let me change that. Luna used to be in love with our delinquent. And Luna, who's played by Mac, hid that fact because Luna's generally seen as the good kid in town and didn't want people to know that she had a relationship with the delinquent Charity. So, our delinquent, I mean, it's very tropey, but I think our delinquent was a former lab rat. That's part of, what she's rebelling against, perhaps, and mad about if she's a former lab rat. So that's one of her traits. And then the outsider is Kalia. And I believe that Scout has a relationship with her. So Kalia keeps telling Scout that he needs to settle down and form some roots and build a community and not make the mistakes that she did, and he keeps ignoring that. So, I think our outsider is an amateur sleuth. That feels fun. She's probably sort of spying on the people in town, and she knows a little more about what's going on and trying to figure it all out. So those are our first traits for everybody in town. And so the second trait is something that is usually a little more personal. So what I'm going to do is take a look at, that's the full thing. I'm going to scroll up to the extremes. So all this stuff at the beginning of creating contacts is just ways to think about how to build the personality of the different contacts, things they might care about, things that can make them interesting to roleplay. And I'm not going through all of these because I like to build up contacts through play in a lot of ways. Before last session, I had no idea that Ash was smuggling AI and robots. That just kind of made sense in how the story went, so that was totally just made up on the fly. And I think that leads to interesting things we'll learn about their character and what they care about. So I like to leave those open spaces. But I need to have 2 traits. It's very unlikely that they'll learn both of them in a session, but I want to have something. So I think what I want to do is look at the extremes as a way to start generating those second traits. I could just grab more from the examples, but these I want to personalize a little bit. So the idea with extremes is thinking about people often have a few personality traits that make them stand out from people. So one of the examples is if you don't have this as a strong trait, you might not be known for being especially pessimistic or optimistic. It might depend on the context. So I might be pessimistic when it comes to politics and government, but really optimistic about my personal relationships. So in that case, we'd say that's not an extreme. An extreme is basically a trait that comes out in almost every single context. It's one of the most consistent things. And so that's how it becomes known. And so thinking about extreme traits combined with that first trait I already gave a person can help me start thinking about what their second trait would be. And so when we're thinking about creating these traits, it's important to remember that these are things that can be used for roles. So what I mean by that is, let's say we have Bales, the gossip, and say that they know that Bales is welcome in all the wrong places. They've learned that about her. They can use her in that trait for making different roles related to it. So say they want to have a connection to one of the local gangs. If they could roll Bales' trait to see how well she connects them to a local gang. And for players, they use bonds. So if it's a 0, it's the same as if you have 0 action points. So you roll 2 dice and keep the lowest. But you can have up to 1, 2, and 3. So, for example, if they had 3 bonds with Bales, they could roll 3 dice when they're trying to use that connection to know somebody in a gang. But this is also kind of flexible in terms of this trait, because if we think about all the wrong places, that can mean a lot of different things. It could also mean that Bales is friendly with a corporate executive, because maybe according to the town, being close to the corporations is really scummy, and so they could use their relationship with Bales to have that bond. So that's one of the things that's built in a little bit to the pre-generated traits, and that I need to keep in mind as I make these unique ones, is it needs to be something that is specific enough, it's clear it can be used or clear it can be triggered, but broad enough it can be used in multiple different ways. So, for example, former Metropolis executive, Rose could know things about business, history, could help them talk to someone in a corporation. There's different ways to flex that depending on how the players want to sort of tap into it. So we're going to start with our gossip Bales, and I think as I do this, I'm going to go through and check in on their relationship that exists with the team. So for Bales, Jacob has a good relationship with her, because Bales apparently kind of lacks common sense, And so Jacob was giving her advice on like how to get along with people better, which in some ways naturally goes with that friends in the wrong place. Like she maybe struggles to have friends in the typical places. So how the extremes work is there's these general areas and then the kind of extremes. So like conversations, the person could be long-winded or very terse. So like doesn't like to talk very much. Assertiveness is a good example of extreme. So on the extreme, someone could always be people-pleasing or always be controlling. Activity, very hyper or very sloth-like. Adrenaline junkie or avoiding stimulation. So these are some of the different extremes. So I think what sticks out to me for Bales and sort of that like lacking common sense is in terms of others' actions, I think she might be over permissive. So she might be over permissive, and what I'm gonna do for now is not create a full trait based on that. I'm just going to keep this idea of her extreme so that as we roleplay the story out, I'll have that in mind, and as we build up to something, it'll make sense what the trait will be. So let's go look at Boone, what Boone's extreme might be. Boone has no relationship with any of the team yet, so that makes him kind of open-ended. So we have that he's the right hand to someone important. So if I'm thinking about extremes with that, Boone is the daredevil. I mean, I like that he'd be very tender-minded. I think like it's easy to see the daredevil is like super tough, and I think or being the right hand to someone important could be seen as like very much a yes man. So I like the idea that he's actually very like tender-minded and compassionate, and having that in mind as sort of going forward. So Rose, I need to change here. Things we know about Rose, I'm going to add the GM notes here, is connected to the Compass Charities, close to Prima Kiev, and involved in smuggling outside of town. And I feel like that almost gives Rose a built-in trait. So Rose is a former Metropolis executive. I think Rose can get her hands on anything, basically. And if I start thinking about like what trait would go with that, let's see if any of these. I think Rose is suspicious. I'll put that. Suspicious of others. Rose is extreme. And then I think the trait is going to be I'll rework the writing later, but can get her hands on anything, or always knows a way, like always knows a smuggling route, always has an escape. Ooh, that goes with suspicious of others. Always has an escape route. And I mean, that can be useful in terms of knowing how to find places and knowing where to go, and also literally just having her help them escape from situations. So that one is where I want to get with the other traits, where we know something about her in the story. So I know she was out smuggling in the antique emporium, combined with the trait of being suspicious, so she would always have an escape route. And this also plays into one thing we didn't talk about in the game, is the players created this huge fire in a very flammable structure, and it was way bigger than they intended. And they didn't stop to think, did they kill the other people in the building? And so I'm going to say they didn't, but they didn't because Rose had an escape route all ready to go. So we're going to look over at our boss. If I remember right, no one has a relationship with him. So we're just going to grab an extreme, and then we'll fill in the trait once we know more about him. So our boss knows too much, and let's see. I mean, he could be overachieving, he could be overconfident. I think he's super optimistic. I think that's going to be his extreme. As our boss is extremely optimistic. So he knows too much. He should be scared. He should feel like this is probably going to go badly with everything he knows. But he's really optimistic. And I like that more than just being like foolhardy or kind of brash. Because I feel like that's super tropey, which is sometimes fun. But I kind of like the idea that like this grizzled looking, rough sort of foreman guy, it's just like really positive about how things are going to go. And that contrasts some with our champion Rose, who's just like really suspicious of people. So now we have Ash. Ash is the caretaker who they wanted medicine, they said, but actually it was AI assembly, basically. And one of the things is that Luna embarrassed herself. She was, at one point, Ash's assistant, and she was supposed to fix a piece of tech, and while working on it, completely, like through clumsiness and just silly mistakes, completely destroyed what she was supposed to fix. And so now Ash looks at her a little bit suspiciously and like lack of faith. So we know that Ash is fearless. Now, I think people-pleasing is very much like a caretaker extreme. But, I mean, I feel like visionary could be interesting. Like, you have this really fearless caretaker who is a visionary. And don't know that I have a trait yet for that. So let's see if any of these inspire. She's a fearless visionary who, I mean, child of a celebrity would be kind of interesting. And we're going to leave that one open. I still want to have some space to determine what that's going to be. Now, Chuck, our freeloader, serves a chimera. So let's look at what Chuck's extremes are. We know Chuck gets into fights, but we also know that Chuck helps people in need, but we know he's serving a chimera. I think he's scheming. I think Chuck is scheming because I think that him helping Scout was a form of scheming. And because Scout was like out and about to get hit by this flash flood, and I think that his loyalty was sort of earned or bought by helping him out. And one of the things in Scout's background is that he was a scapegoat at one point. Like, things went horribly wrong where he was living, and he was blamed. And I think it would be interesting if Chuck knew that, and knew that would kind of make him vulnerable to being befriended. So he's this freeloader. He serves a chimera. He's scheming. And I think he knows everyone's, I don't know if it's going to be like secret or reputation or past mistakes. But it's kind of that idea of like he knows what people are trying to hide. So that one will be fleshed out a little bit more. And our delinquent Charity, who Luna used to be in a relationship with. So she's a former lab rat. She's really good at spoiling and stealth, so chaos and stealth. And I mean, it makes sense for her to be an adrenaline junkie. Or really hyper. I think she's overthinking. So I think when it comes to planning, our delinquent is actually overthinking. And I see that a little bit as almost like an anxiety thing of if she's a former lab rat and she escaped, or so she's on the run, or she is scared that someone will find it out about her or try and sort of use her again. I think she's sort of overthinking to prevent that. And in some ways, like, overthinking and a trait might be like can sense danger, knows when a storm is brewing. I like knows when a storm is brewing because okay. So then Kalia is our outsider. She's an amateur sleuth. She sees herself in Scout, who's our scapegoat turned messenger. And when it comes to responsibility, I think she's inflexible. And what that means is responsibility equals inflexible. And that's our extreme. What that means is like when you're inflexible when it comes to responsibility is very much like you will never break your word. So that could even be a trait, like never breaks her word or always tells the truth kind of thing, never breaks her word, commitment. I don't think that one's good enough yet as a full trait because that might be hard to roll, but it's something to sort of aim towards. And okay. So what we've got for our contacts here are, so we have Bales, our gossip, who's welcome in all the wrong places and tends to be over-permissive, so lets anyone get away with anything. Our daredevil Boone is the right hand of someone important, and his extreme is that he's very tender-minded, so it's kind of that, like, anyone can tug his heartstrings. Our champion Rose, our old lady we already met, is a former Metropolis executive, and she's suspicious of others. Her working trait is always have an escape route. Our boss Lyndon Price knows too much, and his extreme is he's always optimistic, always positive predicting. Our caretaker Ash is fearless, and their extreme is they are visionary, so they dream big, they plan big, they can see it, and there's something to do with AI, and that may or may not be their trait. I mean, I don't want them to secretly be a robot because how I still have the image and description is they have very visible cyberware, so that wouldn't really be a secret. There's something about their visionary. Chuck, our freeloader, serves the Chimera and is actually very scheming. So he's something about like he knows your secret or past mistakes. And our delinquent Charity is a former lab rat who her extreme is she overthinks everything. And she knows when a storm is brewing, so she can like feel when things are going to go bad. And that can be a really good one, like as a trait once they know it, for if they want to have known something's happening or if they want to know about tension in town, like Charity would know. Then the outsider Kalia is an amateur sleuth, which I think would just be fun. And her responsibility, her extreme is that she's very inflexible when it comes to responsibility. So some working trait around never breaks her word or commitment. All right. So we've got all of these sort of set out. And the question then becomes, what do they potentially want? Because if we're thinking of goals for the team, something the team can maybe do, then we need to think of possible missions. So I'm going to create a new handout. Maybe. And, GM notes, let's just do it there. Nope, this is that. So add handout. And GM plans. Alright, so in the GM notes, let's take a look at what some possible missions could be for these people. So, I also know that there are factions going on in the background and they have their goals. Does this really... That's annoying. Okay. So I know the factions have goals and I have an idea of what that is. So some of these things will sort of reflect it or not. So let's take a look. So Bales, our gossip, she's welcome in all the wrong places and is over permissive. So I think one of her sort of delinquent friends got into trouble. They could be missing, imprisoned, need to lie low. But the main thing is one of her friends got into trouble. And I think if we jump over to factions, let's go up. We can see that I think it's going to be in the appendix. We have town factions. And so if we think about Bales is friends with someone who's into trouble. Now, this could be someone who is like kind of stereotypically someone you don't want to know. There's 2 gang factions they could belong to. Or someone that's like an outsider in town, so it could be one of the military factions. The interesting thing about making it like the military is the group already has an interaction with them, so the Red Ropes. Mystery, she's interacted a lot with Jacob. So, and they've already helped her out and have a favor with her. I think it's going to be that. I think that one of her friends got into trouble. And specifically, this is Mystery Captain, I believe it was. Might have to look that up on the VOD. Captain Mystery was supposed to meet her and didn't. And there's unusual activity around the base. She's worried her friend is being held and was maybe acting nervous last time they met. So I think that's one of the things that's going on in town. So that's our gossip. So then let's take a look at our Daredevil, Boone. Now we haven't interacted with Boone at all, so kind of like Bales, so this might be good to be something that ties into the team in some way. So we know that he's the right hand of someone important. We know that he's tender-minded, and he's also a daredevil. So this can be tied to a faction, or it can be tied to one of the other contacts. Let's see. I mean, tying it to Syntheory Tech would really match the first mission. So Syntheory Tech is a faction who they are sort of research and development group from the metropolis who's out here near the town doing experimental technology. But one of the things they may or may not be doing is experimenting with AI, and specifically meshing the mutant wild strain with AI to see what happens, which is very much a Daredevil thing. So, I think for Daredevil Boone, an experiment has gone wrong in the R&D lab, and one of their friends was working in that lab. So basically something's gone wrong in the lab and they haven't heard from their friend. And that also ties us into the AI in the R&D lab of Syntheory Tech. And one of their friends was working in that lab. Alright. So, our champion, Rose. So, Rose is connected to Compass Charities. So let me see what Compass Charities' goal is. To see if that's something I can just kind of pull from. So Compass Charities started 100 years ago. They were a church charity giving temporary housing to people who were being displaced by the growing natural disasters. But what happened is once the wild strain broke out, moving cross country became very, very difficult, and so they couldn't really focus on rehoming and relocating people, And so they kind of reorganized, and they focus on helping people in need, but in return they want sort of scavenge brought. So they're very interested in scavenge. What they do with that is a bit of a mystery. And they want to undercut the hold of Synthery Tech by taking their true serum supply. So, I mean, I think if we think of Champion Rose, and thinking from the champion, like, she wants to protect the town, right? And she wants to help the needy. And she's a former Metropolis executive, so she knows how Synthery Tech is keeping its people in line. She knows they're using this true serum. So what she wants to do is steal the destructive and abusive true serum Synthery Tech uses to monitor its employees. So that's more of a heisty one. Alright. The boss, London Price. Okay, he knows too much, he's optimistic. And I don't think we have any prior relationships with him. So I feel like he would be connected to the Assembly. Assembly is one of the legacy factions, and that means it's something that's been around the town for a long time. And before the town lost its industry, it was a major packing center for a corporation, and so there's more than a mile of sprawling warehouses that were constantly moving product in and out, and there's this network of bullet trains that are now basically abandoned and destroyed. So if we think about the boss as being connected to the Assembly in some way, they want to form an alliance with Compass Charities by helping them secure mil-spec security. So this could be another theft one, or we could be focusing sort of on like data stealing. I mean, if I keep it open, they want to know what product is being moved into the military base, or sort of focus of military experiments. And this could tie in because they already know some of what the military is experimenting with because they got the sort of wild grenade. So this plus like evidence to turn public opinion against them. And I think sort of some of this is because the military, before the military becomes the de facto local police. So one of the things that's going on with the Red Ropes and the local military base that's in this town is they've started acting more and more kind of like local police and militia for the town, because the town doesn't really have a great police force. And so the military saw how some of the gangs were acting, sort of volunteered / just started acting as police. So the boss, London, not a huge fan of that. So it might even be just evidence to turn public opinion against them. So our caretaker Ash. They have some sort of visionary extreme plan. Let's see. I mean, they want to negotiate with a chimera. So Synthery Tech Once during the trust of the Trail Tracers, her faction out in the wild, by helping them negotiate with a chimera. So I think Caretaker Ash has all these robots. Wants to negotiate a protection deal with the local chimera. So I think that's what Ash wants. So Ash has this vision of getting this AI and this technology, but they also want to negotiate a deal with the local chimera to sort of protect them from the wild coming in. Chuck, the freeloader. Their current goal. They're very scheming and they serve a chimera. Let me look at what the chimera faction wants right now. So the Siren Pack is the chimera faction. They're a group of wild, mutated critters that are distinguished by their gifts of mimicry. So they can camouflage themselves, be stealthy, mimic human voices. Like, they have all these different mutations, but they're all around sort of disguise. And they want to become more popular by protecting people from the 1050 gang. So I think Freeloader Chuck knows of a local townsperson made to disappear by the 1050 gang, and the family can't pay the ransom. So they want either wants players to either get ransom money or get the person free. Alright. Now our delinquent, Charity. So with what we know about Charity, she's a former lab rat. She knows when a storm is brewing, so she knows when trouble's happening. Has that relationship formerly with Luna. I think... Let's see if there's any faction stuff going on that sticks out. We haven't done anything really with the Trail Tracers. So, I mean, the Trail Tracers are trying to live in harmony with the mutant, the wild strain. They've mutated more than most people. They can communicate almost like Chimera through this hive mind telepathy. They know any point of interest in the wild. So for our delinquent Charity, nothing is actually jumping out at me for her. She knows trouble is brewing. And we haven't done anything specifically with the gangs. Okay. She knows. Here we go. So, the Moonshiners are a gang that specializes in smuggling, and especially, like, really dangerous weapons. So she knows the Moonshiners have a stockpile in town, and the military, the Red Ropes, are planning to raid it, which will risk the safety of a lot of people in town. So the team could, move the weapons, distract the military. Like, there's all these options, but basically they need to prevent the raid. So that's what Charity wants, is for them to prevent the raid, because a lot of people are going to get hurt. And I think maybe the Moonshiners broke her out of the lab where she was experimented on, or hid her from their searches. So she's that history of, because the Moonshiners are smugglers of weapons. Maybe they thought they're smuggling a weapon and found Charity. So she has that connection. So our very last one is Outsider Kalia. And for this, we know that she's an amateur sleuth. We know that she's very inflexible when she makes a contact. We know she thinks Scout should just settle down. What would our amateur sleuth find out? Our amateur sleuth have one idea, but I don't know if I want to jump to it immediately. I think our amateur sleuth knows that members of the Siren Pack have infiltrated the Assembly, which is sort of the town's like main sort of heritage faction. And she wants them chased off before the Assembly realizes it and wants to take vengeance on the Siren Pack / wild strain humans. Because Kalia herself is very far along in the wild strain mutation. So she's an amateur sleuth. She's figured out the Siren Pack has infiltrated the Assembly. She doesn't know why. She wants them sort of to be convinced to leave or gotten rid of before the locals find out and sort of take vengeance on people who are different or mutated. So if we go through, our gossip has a missing persons that they need to find or break out. Our Daredevil has something's gone wrong in an R&D lab. Champion Rose wants a theft heist. London Price wants sort of to investigate what's going on in the military. Caretaker Ash wants to negotiate a protection deal. Freeloader Chuck wants them to get ransom money or get someone free from a gang, so kind of rescue them. Charity wants them to stop the military raid. And Outsider Kalia wants them to convince some members of the Siren Pack to leave before they're discovered, and that really turns sentiment against wild souls in the area. I feel like that's sort of a range of types of missions and a range of different factions and people it ties into. And that's a big thing. I didn't want all the missions to stay like identical. So I'm going to save that. And so how that works now is I have this as what each of the town contacts want as a goal. So when the team finishes their town phase, they'll have to sort of pick what their next venture is, and they'll do that by basically talking to one of the town contacts. In this way, whoever they pick I have sort of a seed for the adventure. I know what their goals are. I know, based on the material that's in the rule book, what the faction goals are. And a nice thing is it has 3 notable NPCs for every faction that I can just pull, depending on where we end up. So like for the military, we ended up using Mystery. I didn't use the other ones at all. And then I also know what the contact traits are, at least their first one. And I know some ideas to start looking out for their second one, so that if the team starts discovering these traits, I have them prepared. So in a lot of ways, that is the prep that I would do for the game for quite a while. Because at this point, they will work for a contact. We have the contact goals, we know the faction goals, and so I can kind of just play off of that. And then we'll see the next time we start adventure. Let me see, I know I already closed it, but let me pull it up. One of the things we'll see the next time we start adventure is that the players will do a lot of the generation with me while we're in session. And this was 90% of the content from the first session was players sort of generated, mixing with some of what I knew about factions from the book. So how it works is we do something called setting the stage, and each player asks me, the GM, a question, and I'll answer it. And each time a player asks a question, I, the GM, will ask them one, and they'll answer it. And so you can see players can ask me things like, what is the biggest threat? What is the unseen threat? Who is an unseen ally? So they'll ask, and I'll just make it up on the spot. And I will ask them questions in return. So what potential danger worries you the most? I'm pretty sure that's when Christian said killer bees and the birds and the bees and was riffing jokes on that. And so all of that came from that question. I can also ask them, how do these threats scare or intimidate their enemies? And the players came up with the idea that they have this grenade that makes the wild attack people. So like they came up with that. So this is something that, as someone who doesn't like doing a ton of prep and has kind of an improv GM style, I like, and it's part of the way the game is designed, is now that I know the first level about the town contacts and what they want, the rest we can kind of just make up as a group as we go. And really the only times I need to update things are if I want to change a trait. The players can't see any of these traits yet. What the players see is, let's go to the town. The players see blank. They can see their bonds, they can see the power they'll eventually get, but they can't see any of the traits. They don't know these things about them yet. So the rule is, as long as the players don't know yet, you can change it. So if we look at the first trait, Bales is welcome in all the wrong places is the first one I have. Until the players discover that trait, it isn't concrete in play at all. So I can change that. And that's why the second level traits, for most of them, I've just started to flesh out what their personality is so that I can think about that. And as we develop the story, traits will probably present to themselves a little more naturally than just sort of making it up right now. So I have the contacts, I have an idea of their traits, I have an idea of what each of their goals are, I have the faction goals, and everything else we will figure out as a group as we create the missions, the ventures together, and sort of play and roll with it. So I may not do another GM prep like this between now and the next session, because I don't know if it'll be needed. Now players have a tendency to just totally change things and upend things, so naturally if we finish the session and I need to go and drastically rewrite the factions or anything like that, we'll do that. But until then, I hope you enjoyed seeing kind of this rapid-fire look at how I generate all the content I'll need for the campaign, and I hope that you will join us the next time we play.